Welcome to another episode of Feature Presentation with Derek Diamond, where every week we take a deep dive into the trenches of independent filmmaking. I, of course, am your host, Derek Diamond. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out my conversation on last week's show with legendary actor Mr. Vernon Wells. We really dived into the topic of villains in film and why people are so compelled by them, and he's made such a great career at it. Definitely go check out that episode. But this week, I'm joined with voice actress herself, as well as improv star, Miss Laura Faye Smith. Laura, how are you?
I'm great. Good to see you again, Derek.
Absolutely. So before we really dive into our conversation, I did want to preface, so before Pensacon a couple of months ago, which is a local convention that we have here in Pensacola, we kind of indirectly met through a show that two of my friends do, Jason and Jacob, the Open Micers podcast, because you were a guest on that show, but yes. Jason wasn't able to make it, so he asked me to fill in for him. And I remember during our conversation, I'm thinking, at some point I've got to get Laura on my show to talk about her career for this audience as well. So appreciate you taking the time. How have things been since Pensacon, and how was your time at the convention? I know it was a few months ago, but how was it?
Pensacon was great. Like, we got treated so well. The fans were so great. Some just amazing cosplay. That's one of the best things about being at a convention. Like, in the moments where, you're not talking to anybody, it's just like having a movie like playing out in front of you at all times, and the people's creativity and all the costumes and these things they've built, and like that element is so fun. And everybody was very, very friendly. It was great. We had a really great time, and I'd never been to Pensacola, so it was fun to be there and to go eat at some of the local restaurants. And we got treated really, really well. And then I've just been here since then and auditioning and working, and I'm just in the midst of, I'm halfway through an audiobook. I've narrated it. Now I've got to start all the editing. So that's kind of been my life lately, is just trying to get through that.
I have to ask, what restaurants did you go to?
Oh gosh, you're gonna try and get me to remember the names. See, I don't remember the names of them. One we had there, it was Gritza Yaya was like one of their signature dishes.
Probably the Fish House.
Yes, that was the Fish House. And then there was this really great place. I think it was on the square where we went the last night we were there. That was, it was a steakhouse of some kind. And I'm not going to remember the name probably, but it was.
Was it McGuire's?
I don't know. I remember her talking about like Andrew Jackson. Is there a place called Jackson's?
Yes. Yep.
That was it then. Yeah. She talked about Andrew Jackson. I can't possibly remember the name. It was Jackson. And it was phenomenal. Like, just such a good experience, such great staff, excellent food. So yeah, those are the two main places I remember going. We were supposed to go to McGuire's actually one night, and it was so packed because there were so many people at Pensacon. There was like a group of us, like me and like 3 or 4 other people. Kind of at one point we were waiting for this ride to come get us, and they didn't come, and we were like, what's going on? And they were starting to close down the convention center. We were like waiting and waiting. And then finally one of our reps came, and he was like, it's so packed. Like, the wait for a table is like an hour. And he said, I can take you there. And we were like, no, we'll just like go get a place near our hotel. So I think we went to Crabs actually that night, and which was like close to where we were staying, and had a great time. Like, it wasn't super crowded. We'd been in so many crowds all day. And then we had like the friendliest waitress, and the food was really good. And I'll eat anything fried. So, you put me in a place where I can get like hush puppies and French fries and fish fillets, I'm happy.
You're making me wish I lived closer to Crabs.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. Awesome. And it was only your second convention that you had been to. So now that you've kind of made your name for yourself in both live action and in voice acting as well, how was it interacting with fans of yours that you say like play the Mario games, which are the voice of Princess Rosalina?
Yeah.
And we'll get into all of that a little bit later on. But how is that experience, meeting the fans face to face?
It's so great. Like, everybody is so lovely and kind. And, some people like bring you little gifts, which you're just not expecting at all. Or, there was a girl, because I do a voice for a game called Genshin Impact, which is like an open world game and more of an anime style of animation. And I met a girl, and, she was like super emotional, because she like really loves the game and loves the character. And that's that's so remarkable to see, like where you just think, oh my gosh, like you do your work and you do your job, but then when you realize that someone's like, gosh, this was a game that I played and it was important to me during this period of time, and you hear that and you just think, because so many people, I think, a lot of times look at actors and actors careers as like, oh, so you put on funny costumes, or you talk in weird voices and people pay you for that real important job. Like there is a level of sometimes judgment about that, of like, well, it's not like you're saving anyone's life. And I'm like, not in the way like a doctor would or something. You're right. That's absolutely true. But entertainment and storytelling is meaningful to people. I mean, emotionally, I think it's really meaningful to people. I think that's why it's endured so long. Like, why has it been around this long if it was absolutely useless and unwanted? Like, why do we crave arts and music and books and writing and theater and all those different types of things if there wasn't something innate in us as humans? Because certainly there's plenty of other things to do. If you don't want to watch television or movies or listen to music or play video games, there's a million other things you could do with your time. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because as the saying goes, yeah, you may not be curing cancer, but movies, video games, TV shows, they can provide a sense of escape and a sense
comfort.
and because, a lot of people, they don't grow up with very easy lives. So their way to escape might be to watch, a movie or a show, or, play Mario Brothers or play another video game. I know I can certainly attest to that. And plus I grew up an only child, so I had to find my own
friend.
Yeah, I had to find my own means of entertainment, and that was through movies and video games. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And I mean, I can certainly think of writers that I've like read a lot during a certain phase in my life, or certain artists' music that like really got me through like a breakup or a sad time or something, where it made you feel better, or like pumped you up in a way that you needed at a certain time. Like that stuff exists. And that person's just out there doing their thing. Like I'm sure they're always, when you create something, you're pleased when it has a positive impact on people, but you don't know that at the time that you're doing it. You're just doing this thing that you thought was interesting. Or sometimes in some cases, people don't know at all. Like they got cast in a thing and they did it, and then it suddenly becomes a thing. Like it becomes very popular and kind of takes off and captures people's enchantment. And that's fantastic when that does. But I mean, that's what I think is so interesting when people kind of criticize actors or anyone being like, can't believe you did that project. Didn't you know how bad it was going to be? And I'm like, I guarantee you, most of us do not go into a project going, well, I hope this sucks. I hope everybody who watches it hates it. I hope it's boring. I hope it's a waste of everyone's money and time. You think like when you get that, the way it's been presented to you, maybe the people that were involved, maybe the way it read on the page, but didn't translate to the performance of it, whether it was live or televised or whatever. There's a lot of things that happen in between you reading a script or, getting a project and doing it, or something that you're like, who knows who's even going to ever see this? Like, you do a little project and you think, I'm going to do this once. And then all of a sudden it's like, now it's a series, or like, now it's a thing. Like there are plenty of things I've done that haven't taken off at all. And then you're in things that are wildly popular. You have no way to know. It's just kind of sometimes very zeitgeisty too, like really good projects for whatever reason don't capture anyone's imagination, and total crap gets incredibly popular and people just eat it up, and it's like junk food for the mind and they love it. And I think there's room for all of it. Like I don't say that in a judgmental way of like, I love certain trash TV. Like I have gravitated towards it at times where I'm like, I have been thinking and solving problems and dealing with stress all day. I want to watch the most mindless thing that I can get my hands on. So I never am like, people shouldn't make that. That's trash. I'm like, sometimes you need trash as much as sometimes you need to eat candy for dinner. Like that's just a thing.
It's funny you mentioned that, because this past Friday, I had like a really long, really hard day, and it kind of encompassed a hard week at work.
Yeah.
And my wife brought up the idea, why don't we watch Encino Man? Which is, I don't know if you've heard of Encino Man, but it stars Brendan Fraser.
It's an older movie. Yeah.
It's got Brendan Fraser, Sean Astin, and Pauly Shore. Dumb, mindless movie, but it was exactly what I needed. But there is a place for that. And I agree with you. Nobody sets out to make a bad product or a bad movie.
Right.
But sometimes the badness can actually provide entertainment, like in a good way.
The badness can be brilliant too. Like think about cult classics. Like, I mean, Rocky Horror has become a cult classic, but when it came out, people are like, what is this? Like, I mean, obviously it was a stage play first, but then all of a sudden when it becomes this movie, I mean, I'm sure people at first were like, and younger generations who come in and learn it at first, it's like, wait, when was this done and why and who and what were people on when they made this? And like, that's a question. Or something like The Room, right? Which is like a cult classic, so bad it's brilliant sort of a thing. You are literally watching it for that very reason. And sometimes that's the fun of it, is watching something that you feel superior in the process of watching that, but that's enjoyable.
And then you get movies about the making of bad movies.
Exactly.
Like The Disaster Artist. So
like
there
the
you go.
Disaster Artist. Yeah.
So in talking about movies, shows, and video games, I have to ask, what made you want to get into the crazy world of film and entertainment?
I became an actor because my sister was doing theater when I was like in middle school and she was in high school. She's a couple of years older than me. And that was not an area of interest for me at first at all. Like that's not what I kind of wanted to do. I wanted to do like cheerleading and all that kind of stuff. But circumstances kind of transpired where my mom asked me to hold off on that for a year because she was having surgery and we lived out in the country and there was nobody to like take me to practice because my sister didn't drive yet and she wasn't going to be able to drive and my dad was at work. So I waited a year. And in that year, while I was waiting, I auditioned for a play and ended up getting cast. And then I started doing that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is what I want to do. Like, that was one of the first moments in my life where I really like went, I've found my thing. Like that's the earliest memory I have of being like really certain about something. So that was in my life, just, as a hobby, like, but then when I went to college, my parents were like, we're not going to pay for you to study acting because you'll never make money doing that. So they basically said, you have to go, but you have to major in something. You can go to college, we'll pay for it, but you have to major in something that you could actually get a job with. So I majored in English, but it was technically a double major in English and theater because of the level of credits that I had. If I'd gone like one more term, I would have had 2 degrees. But it was just what I always loved doing. It never felt like work. Like the work that I did for my theater classes never felt like that. And then when I graduated from college and moved to Portland, I just started doing a lot of theater. And then there was like a bit of a small film and commercial market in Portland where I was living. And I started doing that. And it all just kind of like, it was just something that I always wanted to be doing. So I would do other things to make money for sure. Like I had a corporate job and, I was an HR manager and an executive assistant and I did all sorts of things like that. But I was always paid or unpaid, constantly doing this other work on the side. And most of the time, luckily enough, I was getting paid. I got paid to improv, which a lot of people don't. Like I was a touring actor with that, and that was always paid work. I got paid to do commercial work. I did some network television. I did Grimm while I was living there, Grimm and Leverage. So I just got really lucky like that. It was, and it's a thing when you're in a smaller market like that, the pond is a little smaller. Sometimes those opportunities to some degree can be a little easier. There aren't as many of them, but you're not competing against as many people. So sometimes like starting in a small market like that can be great. Like it can actually help you start building a resume before you move to a place like LA or New York, where many, many more opportunities, just many, many more people competing for them.
It's interesting, you're going back to your initial discovery of your love for this craft. It's always interesting hearing everybody's story because I say this every week on the show. There's not a how-to guidebook to get into acting, directing, whatever the case may be. It always hooks somebody. Like once you are hooked by it, there's nothing else that can give you that creative satisfaction.
I remember sitting at my corporate job sometimes because I really tried hard to be something else. Like I tried to have like a responsible job with a 401k and benefits because, everyone around you was like, are you crazy? You're going to try and be an actor? Look at, like how? And I was like, you're right. How? Like, how am I going to do this? So, I had responsible jobs, but I remember there would be times like friends of mine that I had gone to school with or whatever, who were pursuing their dreams and were like, I'd get email blasts or something from them and you'd see what they were working on or hear about it. And I remember just like being happy for them, but so envious at the same time because I felt like I was robbing myself. You know what I mean? Like I'm doing this responsible thing over here because I don't know how to not do it because I didn't really have anyone in my life saying it's possible. Go ahead and try. Everyone was kind of like, ugh, you might end up under a bridge. It seems like a terrible idea. Like I had a lot more of that than anyone saying, why not try? Why not move to LA or New York? Why not do that? Like I had a lot of people around me that were more discouraging that idea than encouraging it. Not to be mean, I think, just because they didn't see the possibility in it either. And I don't even think it was an insult towards my ability. It was like, how does one go about doing that? We don't know. So I do remember that really visceral feeling of watching people pursue this acting, theater, performing dream. And because it was mine too, feeling that kind of just ache, when I would see that kind of stuff, and just think, why can't I do for myself what I'm seeing these other people do? And it was just a lot of fear, it was like, and just not knowing how, and thinking, what happens while I'm trying to figure that out? Like, do I starve to death? Do I have to move back in with my parents? Like, what does life look like if I, ditch what I'm doing? So I kind of did it while I was doing something else. Like I started building a resume, but I always had another like 8 to 5 job while that was going on for a really long time. So when people kind of are beating up on themselves because things haven't happened like that, I'm like, there are very few people it happens for like that. There are a few, and God love them. That's great. I'm happy for them. But it's more people that, like you said, there's no one path. There's no guidebook. There's a lot of ways around it. And I actually love hearing to interviews with actors as well, because it makes you go, there's so many different ways to go about it. It opens up the possibility for you too. Because it's like, oh, well, that person wasn't like, 19 years old and had been a series regular. They like trudged along, and they thought about giving up many different times, and they worked a lot of crummy jobs in the meantime, and they were trying to make it all work. And then at some point something happened. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. For most people. Some people get the sprint, and God, wouldn't it be nice? It just hasn't been mine.
No, you're absolutely right. And you're right about the fear of failure. And I think that's what ultimately stops a lot of people who want to act or maybe want to write a screenplay or direct. Right. It's the, what if it doesn't work?
Right.
But I find that as I've gotten older and I think, oh, well, I should try new things, or I should try this new thing, so on and so forth. When I was, say, like 10, 15 years younger, I would, like, the fear would have overtaken that, because I'd be like, well, it's probably not going to work out. Like, I'll talk myself out of it.
Right.
But you don't know unless you do it. And I find that the thought in the back of your mind of, what if I would have done that? Because I have regrets too. Like everybody does. Like, what if I had tried this? Would things have worked out differently? So I find that trying it and failing, because it may not work, but at least then But it's better than not trying at all.
Better to live with regrets than remorse, right? Like if you kind of get to the end of your life, it's like the things that you tried that didn't work, you still got something out of that, right? Like you learned from it. And not to mention certain things that don't work right away, sometimes have a habit of weirdly working out later. Like this is such a weird little story, but like I have a very strong teaching background. And the way I became a teacher, I had no teaching experience at all. But I had been at an audition, and there was a woman who was also auditioning for this play. And while we were sitting out in the hall waiting to go in for our turns, and she was older than me, so we weren't even up for the same role, we were talking, and we were just like having this really nice conversation. And then I had auditioned for this children's theater a few times, and I had just auditioned for a show for them, and it didn't end up getting cast. But then I got a call from the artistic director, and it was that woman who I had met like years prior. I want to say like 6 years prior or something. It had been a while. And she offered me a teaching job. And I was like, because she had seen my resume back in the office because I had auditioned for this play. And I said, well, I don't have any teaching experience. And she goes, I just got a feeling you'll be good. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know why you think that, because I honestly have no idea what I'm doing. And so I taught this class, and I made a ton of mistakes. And I was like, they will never ask me back. And they did. Like she personally liked me. And it was that human connection of us just sitting and talking that day at an audition for a play. It had nothing to do with the place that she worked. And I didn't know where she worked, and I didn't know who she was from a hot rock. Like we were just two people having a nice conversation and just connecting. And that suddenly translated into this teaching career that I had for years. And, like that's a great skill set to be able to pull from. And I don't know if it would have ever happened had I not been at that audition, talked to that woman, made a good impression without trying to, because I didn't know what she could do for me. I thought she was just another actress. Like I didn't know her job or what she did for a living. I don't think we even talked about that. I just think we talked about theater. It's weird how those things come around, and so here it was like, I didn't get cast. Neither of us got cast in that play. that we both auditioned for. And then I didn't get cast in the play for her theater. So I'm feeling like failure. And then the next thing I get is a really steady teaching job that went for years.
Well, there's a silver lining in everything. Like if you can take something from failing, whether it's a lesson or in your case, an opportunity to have, a whole new aspect to your career. And I can imagine, even though you said you made a ton of mistakes in teaching in the beginning, that had to be such a confidence booster for you, though, to have somebody who had your back to that extent, that just believed so much in you. And then even after you felt like you didn't do that great of a job, that they wanted to keep you on. And then that
I was honestly shocked, because I was pretty just like, oh, I'm so terrible at this, and like, I think it was me versus, like, I want to say 16 little girls, like, and when I say versus, it's not like they were out to get me. That's just a lot of kids for one teacher to manage. And then they actually let me bring in like an assistant to like just help corral. And they were all like, none of them were even in first grade yet. They were all like preschool to kindergarten age. That's an age, like, that's not like people who are super independent workers. Like, you've got to like have eyes on the room. And I've got so many stories. I won't even go into them all. Just like that, the whole experience was just like so many things of me going, what do? I don't know I don't know how to deal with parents. I don't know how to deal with kids. I don't know how to deal with any of this. I was like 22, 23 years old. I was young, so, no, I couldn't have been that young. Maybe not as many years went by. I think I said 6 years. So maybe I was more like 24, 25, something like that. But I was going 6 years. That would have made me much too old for when that would have been. But anyway, yeah, that's, you're right. Like those things that happen, something comes out of everything. And I've done plays that I've hated and met some of my closest friends in the process. Like, I've done work artistically that was not that interesting, but came out with friends that I've treasured for the rest of my life. So that there's a good reason to say yes to like opportunities when they come up, even if you're kind of looking at it going, I don't know, I can't look at this and predict if this is going to be like a major amount of money, or it's going to like lead me to some next big thing, or give me some level of exposure that'll be really good for my career. But sometimes it's just the people that you meet, or the experiences you have. And like, you never know whose career is going to like take off in a really interesting way, even if the project you were working on wasn't a great project. Like, if that's like, have you ever gone back and watched like the first films of certain directors, like when you kind of really look at a director's whole career and you look at their early work and you're going, yeah, I wonder if the actors on that film had any inkling of what this person was going to be while they were doing that, or if they were kind of like, okay. And then they become like this really beloved auteur.
Yeah. And you're right. You never know unless you actually do it.
Yeah.
And it's like the whole teaching thing where you said, I don't know how I'm going to handle all these kids. Like the best way that I've learned to learn is to just dive right in. Yeah, you might make mistakes, but it's like with film, classes are great, but nothing beats being on a set, or in your case, being in front of a camera or on stage or in the voice booth. Like, nothing can replicate that.
Well, and that's one of the things I think is great about being in a small market, because, well, so for instance, so I went to college and I did not go to an arts college. I went to a school that really was more of like a business school. Like that was, they were known for their business college and the university more than they were known for their theater department. So in that sense, you could be like, well, and I was like, well, one of the reasons I was there is because I wasn't supposed to be majoring in it. So it was not like that mattered, like to my parents, when we were like, trying to figure out where I should go. But I got tons of stage time. I know people who are in other programs, other places where, you have to audition to get from the next level to the next level. And only juniors and seniors can be in the main stage show, and freshmen and sophomore, have to work backstage or whatever. You've got all these rules about it where people really have to earn it. But like right away, I was on the main stage doing stuff, like not big roles necessarily right away, but right away I was performing. And I've learned more performing than I have in any class I've ever taken, because you were up there in front of the audience. Like, that's the thing. Like, you learning what an audience is like is a vital part of being a performer, especially if you're doing a live medium. But you really start to understand, especially like doing things like improv, like, what do people find funny? And sometimes it's really depressing what people find funny. Like, you can say something so cerebral and intellectual and smart, and people are just like, and then you say some stupid, like, scatological or sexual joke, and people die laughing. And to you, it's just like, that's like something you'd get off the bathroom wall somewhere. It's like that level, like a 13-year-old boy sex joke type thing, and people think it's the funniest thing in the world. But that's an important thing to know as a performer. Again, like you got to take the judgment out of it. You can't be like, bad humor shouldn't exist. It's like, I just made a whole room full of people really happy right now with that joke. Like they died laughing at that and they're having a good time. And isn't that what they paid for? As opposed to me being like, no, stop. Those are not the smart jokes. I would like to tell you the smart jokes. Let me go ahead and, make some Darwin reference for you. And they're just going to be like, huh? Like, can you please go back to the bathroom jokes?
You're like, nope, I'm going to tell you what you like. You don't know.
I'm going to tell
I
you
do.
what you think is funny. And it's like, yeah, nobody responds well to that program. So yeah, figuring out audiences and understanding the kind of rhythm, like it's certainly live theater, the second people are like disconnecting because they move around and they cough and they shift and they get up and walk out, or they start whispering, or like that's a telltale sign that it's not engaging. And live theater is a great training ground for that. Like in terms of understanding pace, like how fast do I need to move this along? How long are they going to stick with me and before they disengage? And improv too, like how long. Sometimes I always feel like people who write scripts should have to take improv classes, because basically, if you're doing like long form improv, you're basically doing an improvised play, and really understanding how long you can stretch something before your audience is like, we don't understand, the character relationship objective, where that's not clear enough right now. But people will hang with that for a little bit. But if it goes on too long, and then they're going to like change the channel, or, certainly now where it's like everything's on demand. It's like, there's too many options. You can't afford to let people disengage.
Well, there's just so much content out there that, somebody can jump from one show to the next. They can go from one streaming platform to the next. So
yep.
You're absolutely right. And that's something I was curious about as someone who has a background in theater and improv. How did it help train you for your transition to live action acting as well as voice acting?
When you say live action, you mean like on camera stuff?
Correct. Like being on a set, live action acting.
Yeah. I mean, theater, I think, is the best training ground in the world. So many people will come up, especially at like conventions, and say, I'm really interested in getting to be a voice actor. What do you recommend? And I'm like, go get some training, like go to your local university, like even just take the intro to acting class there. See if you like it. Because like there's commercial work sometimes can be about having a pretty or interesting sounding voice and being like, at US Bank, blah, 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 blah. There's a fair amount of that, but that's not what most people want to do. Like certainly at a convention. Now, maybe there's like some commercial convention. Everyone's like, that's what I want to do. The people I meet who are coming to, get signatures from people who are doing voiceover for characters on, cartoons and movies and shows and video games, like that's acting. I mean, that is acting work. You are simulating rage and fear and anger and love. And like, you're in horrible, terrible situations and, and like taking different levels of what they call damage, where like people are crashing into you or trying to kill you, or you're killing someone else. Like that's all the type of stuff. And so being able to portray emotion, that's a big deal. And you learn that in theater, like, and especially then having improv in that mix. Improv I came to later. Like I did theater training and then I did kind of improv. I fell into improv. Improv was actually kind of just a fluke. I had no interest really in being involved in improv, but that when I moved to Portland, I auditioned for a couple of things and that's what people kept hiring me to do. And they were paying me. I was trying to get into regular theater. I'm like, I'm a dramatic actress. And everyone's like, well, we don't want you for that. And so then all of a sudden, all these like comedy improv things were like, we'll take you and we'll pay you. So I was doing it, but I had no training. And for at least 2 or 3 years doing that, would sometimes have great shows and sometimes have terrible shows and not really understand why it worked and why it didn't. Like I had a lot of intuition towards it, but not a lot of technique. Technique is so valuable because you can fall back on your technique when other things aren't working. So I finally went and took some training. I went to like the Loose Moose School up in Calgary, Canada, where Keith Johnstone, who's like, the father of improv and wrote the book Impro, he teaches there. And I took their program. And I came out of that and I was like, okay, now I'm starting to understand when it's failing, this is why. It's not about standing up there and being funny. It's about storytelling. And it's like, I was talking about earlier about understanding platform tilt. Like you can only stay in a platform for so long before it has to change positive or negative, and the way story is crafted. And once you understand that, and once you have that ability to like improv within a story frame as a character you just made up. And I've even done like musical improv, which is wilder because they're like playing a song you've never heard and you're suddenly guessing where that's going to go musically and lyrically. Like you're making up the lyrics and singing a song you've never heard. And then these brilliant piano players are just kind of like working with you on that. And those are the people that truly knock me out as musicians, who can improv with someone who's doing that. That when you get that, then it was kind of like, to me, improv training was like when you run with weights on your ankles. And then when I went back to theater, so I did theater, I did just a glut of improv and nothing else for a few years. And then I went back into theater. I finally started getting into the theater circuit, and I was getting cast a lot. And I was so much more fun as an actor. Like that's what I kept getting feedback is, you're so fun. You don't ever do anything the same way twice. Like you have so many choices. That was all that improv training, because there was no script anymore. And I was just like trying different things all the time, and it loosened me up. And I was a person who really needed that, because I was pretty uptight. Like, you know what I mean? I took myself a little too seriously. I don't think I was a lot of fun prior to that. It's weird to me that I was getting cast in comedy improv when I wasn't particularly fun, or loose, or even funny. I don't know. I mean, maybe other people thought so. Maybe my seriousness was like what was funny. I don't know. Honestly, it's still a puzzle to me, like why I did so well in that arena with no training, and I didn't particularly love it. So like, how did that happen and why? I couldn't even explain. But when I went back to theater, I was so appreciative of everything that I had been learning and that I'd been working in that so intensively. And I toured a ton with improv. And when you tour with the same group of people and you're doing these improvised shows every night for nights on end, and you're like together all day traveling in vans and, you know, like all over the Midwest, and, you know, like just the way you work at the beginning of a tour to the way you work at the end, like the chemistry and the ability to kind of read each other's minds and set each other up and make each other look good, that supportiveness and that real understanding. If you're doing that, if I'm like, I know Derek loves to play a robot, so I'm going to set him up to be a robot in this scene. And you're like, yes, my friend is here and we're going to play, and we're out there having such a great time together. How much fun then the audience has watching that. Like, have you ever heard that like Stephen Colbert, Steve Carell, Amy Poehler, Tina Fey, I think all those people were like, Amy Sedaris were all in Second City right around the same time. Like, mm-hmm. And they all kind of performed together. And now we look at how brilliant all of them are individually. Can you imagine for a group of people who are working together consistently and now just like kind of knowing their work individually, imagine that group of people together in close camaraderie on a weekly basis, what those shows must have been like. I would love to talk to people who like have lived in Chicago a long time and were regulars at Second City and just hear their stories about what the audience experience was for that. Because it had to be magical to watch artists kind of at the height of their youth and fun and like everything they're learning, exploring and doing that together. I just think that would have been so exciting to watch.
My mind's blown just at the thought of that, because I've growing up, you know, Whose Line Is It Anyway was a huge show on TV, and it's still one of my favorite shows of all time to this day.
The British version or the Drew Carey version?
I grew up more with the Drew Carey version, but I love both. I've gone back and watched the British version since then. Yeah. But that's where I really fell in love with and started respecting the craft of not just theater acting, but with improv, because you don't know what's going to happen, but you and other improv actors just play it off so naturally. And it's just, it's a skill that I will admit I'm extremely jealous of, because it's so it's a work of art unto itself. You know, film is an art, acting is an art, improv in itself to me is its own art form, because of just the hilarity that you can cause because of it, because you never know what's going to happen. You never see the same show twice.
Exactly. And you as the actor, you just have no idea where it's going half the time, or what someone might do that might surprise you, or, you know, different ways that you can respond to things. Like, yeah, it's incredibly exciting to watch and to be in, and talk about being in a dance with your audience, right? Like, talk about like, not only am I feeling at you as my fellow performer and like kind of trying to see where you're going and what you're thinking and what you're doing, I'm also like still like keeping my eye on the audience and their level of engagement and what's going on. Like, your senses are so alive and you're so focused and you're so present. If it's going well, like if you're sitting over there trying to pre-plan, it's not going well at all. You're usually having a really bad night. But when you're in the zone with it, and when you're working with other really generous, funny people who you think are really generous and fun, like you like them, like it's hard to like get a better high than that, to like come off this improv show that you guys created together. And, you know, if you see long form shows, which are like improvised plays, you know, like they've got a first, second, and third act sort of a thing, and they've got a story arc and all these different things that happen. And to be an audience member and go, that's only existed once. No one will ever see that again. I just happened to be there for it that night and to be a part of that. And yeah, it's very exciting stuff. And then when you get into like situations, even on camera, where like someone goes up on lines, that ability to just continue the scene and help someone get back on. Like, I don't get super scared about that anymore, like about being on stage with someone and someone forgetting lines and jumping, and people do. It happens all the time. But I always feel pretty like, there's only been a couple times where I've been in shows where the shows were crafted in such a way that my lines didn't really overlap with the other people's. Like it wasn't like a dialogue type thing. Like we were monologuing near each other or something like that. There's times where you really can't help people, but in situations where you can, it feels so good to be able to be like, it's going to be okay. Like we're going to work this out, and it's not going to be the end of the world. We'll just like improv our way through these moments till we can kind of get back on and people get their footing, and to not feel like panicked and like, oh my God, I just need to leave the stage right now.
And I bet most of the time the audience doesn't know that there's like something's wrong or there's some type of panic between the performers.
It's so funny. Audiences are so like, I know people get like stage fright or they get really worried, but it's again, like we were saying earlier, how many times have you gone to a play or a movie and been like, I hope this sucks? Like the audience is so on your side. They want to have a good night. Like they want it to be great. So they're like, maybe the person who auditioned for your role wants you to suck. Like that person might be out there, but that's like one person. Like most of the audience who laid down, I don't know, 40, $50 to see that, they want to have a good time and they want you to be good. And like, have you ever noticed like if you go see a comedy that's not very good, people will still laugh a lot in the first few minutes of the play, because their intention is to be happy. And then as it continues to suck, then the laughing tapers off. And pretty soon they're like, why are you guys so bad? Why are you ruining my Friday night? Like you can sense that kind of resentment of like, I'm working so hard to like you. I am sitting out here in this chair working so hard to have a good time. And it would be nice if you would meet me halfway as a performer. Like you can feel that. And I've been in those shows where it's like, yeah, the show is not good. And that's why, but I always noticed in the beginning of the night, people were more like, ha, yeah, okay, well, I'm here to like this. And as opposed to, I think sometimes people imagine your audience out there as like a bunch of people like newspaper critics, who are just like looking for something to pick apart or something. And I think even those people, like the more shows you have to go see, the more you are delighted when something's good. I was on this committee called the Drammy Committee in Portland, where it's basically like the Tonys for Portland, but you have to go see like all these shows, like 50, 60 shows. Do you know how hard it is to sit through that many shows when they're not good? Like you love the people who give you a good night. Like you're so grateful to them because it's just like, oh, thank you. Like I scrambled for parking tonight and like rushed here and just made it. And you're good. And thank you for that. So I do think, I don't remember why I was talking about that. I got off on a tangent. Do you remember what we were talking about too?
No, we were just talking about I was talking about the specific respect that I have for improv, because just the courage to do something like that. Because I've taken an acting class. I took one several years ago, and it's not for me. Like I respect the craft. I respect those who do it and those that are great at it, but it's not me. Like my place is behind the camera. I know that.
That's a great thing to know, but it's great that you took a class, because I think once you do that, then it helps you know how to direct actors. Like you understand the information that they don't have. Like a lot of directors I've worked with on like small independent films, one of the things I wish that they understood was like, the more information you share with me as an actor, the better I can do, because there's times where if you don't, if you can't tell, if it hasn't been like outlined in the script, or they change their mind on something and you see the final product and you're like, if I'd known you were going to do that there, I could have set it up here in my scene in a really interesting way for you. But all I had was like the pages that you gave me. And I just like was working with that. So the more you can't manage what you don't know. So like the more information I have as an actor, then the more I can bring and collaborate with you and, be like, well, what if we did this? Or what if we did that? And, I know you're going for this over here. So what if we did this here? And sometimes people in those roles will have really good ideas around that, and other times not. And you'll have to say no to that. But I do think understanding actors by being an actor for a little bit like you did is such a smart thing to do, because it's always going to help you know how to talk to them and what to arm them with to get the best work out of them.
Well, I've said since I've been into film and really learning the process of how films are made, everyone should have at least a basic understanding of the other person's job. So like as an actor, I feel like you should have a basic understanding of what goes on behind the camera, whether it's director of photography,
Oh,
writing, directing, and vice versa.
telling the sound guy you're going to yell on a line so you don't, he can adjust so that you have usable sound, right? Like if you're like just arbitrarily screaming, makes it really hard for them to like ever use any audio that you create. And like, I will check with people. I'm like, hey, I think I'm going to yell on this part right here. It's coming up. So you can turn your headphones down and like adjust the gain and stuff. And they're like, thank you.
Because that's what film is. And the same goes for television as well. It's all a collaboration. And it's, a project, whether it's an episode of a TV show, a short film, or a feature, it's a machine. And we're all cogs in the machine. We all have to work together in order for the machine to run. So,
and you ask, go ahead.
I was going to say, if we all aspire to make, the other aspects that we're not involved with successful, then it'll be a great project. It'll be a success.
And you were asking earlier about kind of that transition from live stuff to on camera voiceover stuff. Like that's one of the biggest things for me that I had to get used to is, if you work on a play, you do all the rehearsals, then you run it and you run it night after night and you are living that experience every night. Like if you're working at like a place like Portland Center Stage, you're doing performances Tuesday through Sunday with Mondays off and sometimes 2 on the weekend, like 2 a day on the weekend. And so you're doing that sometimes in like a Christmas show, like 10 times a week. Like you really live that project and then it's over and it's done. Film, you work 3 or 4 days sometimes, depending on like what it is. If it's a small film, you might shoot 3 or 4 days or whatever, or sometimes longer, but then you go away for this huge period of time while all these other people work on it. And I frequently forget that I even did the thing until all of a sudden they'll be like sending me the cut of it, or they'll say it's entered in this film festival and here this is going on. And I'm like, right, I did that. And you're not allowed to talk about anything while you're in it because there's all these NDAs. So it's not like you're talking about it anywhere. I literally forget about projects that I've done until suddenly someone will like send me an email and say, hey, promote this on social media. And I'm like, what? Oh, that was like 1.5 years ago. That's been one of the weirdest transitions, is having stuff that you've worked on in this huge span of time, because theater is so immediate. It is literally immediate from you rehearse and then you open and you run and it's over. And then the experience of doing it is immediate, like how it's doing, how it's going, what people are thinking is a night to night experience. And then film is like this thing where you have no sense of what it's going to look like really while you're working on it, unless you are doing multiple roles where you're doing some behind the camera or people happen to show you stuff. But a lot of times people don't even show you what they shot. You just do your job and you go home and you go away from the project, and it films other locations sometimes that you're not involved in, and all these other things happen. And then one day you sit down and go, I don't even know which of my scenes made it into this. So that's weird. That's been like one of the weirdest transitions of like working between those two mediums. Like, what theater is going to look like. You're doing it every day during rehearsal. Like you have a really clear sense of what that project is going to be. And then a really clear sense of how people feel about it, because they're either like snoring in the audience or leaving or talking or rapt with attention and jumping to their feet afterwards. And film, you're like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what people are going to think of this project because I don't know what it's going to look like. I have no sense of it.
Yeah, the actual production is just the tip of the iceberg. Post is when the fun stuff happens. Like,
and I'm never a part of that.
It's fun. And with my short that I did a couple of years ago, I also edited the film as well. So that was I've always liked the post side of things, because editing to me is just so fascinating, because it's like putting a puzzle together. As directing it, I had pretty much visually what I wanted to do, but still seeing it on my computer and putting the scenes together and then adding, the sound mix and the score and everything. It's just literally like putting a puzzle together, and you're like, it's a movie.
One thing I think is so fascinating about film is that I just realize how much the camera is like this, like that, like the camera tells the director and the camera tell you where you get to look in the story. If you're looking at a stage and you're seeing all these bodies up there, you can choose what you watch. Like, and yes, they might put a spotlight on something, or yes, there may be something big, but if you're one of these people who likes to look around, like you can still like look over and watch that one person because you feel like it, where you only get to look at what's in the frame. And yes, you can like maybe watch someone in the background if you choose to. But, if a camera like going in, for a close-up shot, like that's what you get to look at. Like there's so much more directorial story control in film that is a little bit more of a free-for-all in theater, because there's just lots of people up there and things that could happen. Like if you put a kid or a dog up there, forget it. Everyone's going to watch that. Where in film, you could just be like, I worked on a project with a guy who was like, I could tell like he was just irritating the hell of the director the whole time, because the director kept saying, do less, do less, do less. And then he continued to just do as much as he was doing. And when I saw the final thing, they literally had just like moved him out of frame. They finally just took, like, he was not in it. Like he didn't have a main role. Like, he was doing stuff. And that's why they kept saying do less, as he was really pulling focus. And I think they finally just were like, just move the frame over. And they just did. And he just like, I'm like, he's nowhere in that project. Like he's briefly in the background, but like all his stuff that he was like doing, thinking this is going to get me my moment. It's like, they don't have to look at you. It's just not stage where they have to look at you. You can be like really irritating and distracting on stage, and everyone on stage is like giving you the stink eye, but you do that on film and it's just like, we'll cut you out of the shot. We'll cut you out of the edit. That can all go away.
We always find a way.
And sometimes it's well-deserved.
True.
Like if you ask someone that, they should stop.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me about your transition to voice acting and some of the, maybe like was there a challenge for you to transition from acting on, whether it's on stage or on a set, to being in a small room with a microphone and a script?
The kind of luxury of voice acting is that, it's not live and you don't have to worry about what you look like, and it's not memorized. So you throw those three elements in. Voice acting felt like one of the easiest things I was doing. So when you talk about transition, it was just kind of like, sweet, this is a great gig. I'm getting paid to not do my hair and makeup, to not have to memorize a line and worry about getting anything wrong, and to be able to do it over and over again because it's not live if I screw it up. And so, that's actually, it just felt like kind of a vacation in that sense, where I was just like, whew, this is easy. So.
Yeah. I voice acting also, all of film and entertainment, fascinates me. But one thing about voice acting is, I've watched behind the scenes documentaries of, say, like Aladdin, and watch Robin Williams be the voice of the genie, and the fact that he's essentially just himself because he's being so animated with his hands and really getting into the role. As a voice actor, does that help when you're getting into the role of that character? Is still essentially act as if you're on set?
And especially like video game stuff, like if I am like throwing something, like the character's throwing something or getting hit, like I will physically be like, like I will jerk. This, for anyone listening to this, like the visual is I just like threw myself back. Like, I will like physically throw something forward. I will, sometimes to get hit in the chest, I will like, hit myself in the chest with that. Physically moving around and using your hands. And even when I do audiobooks, I tend to talk with my hands. I'm Italian, I'm someone who like gestures a lot anyway. So the more ramrod straight if I'm really stiff and still, I do feel like it translates into the performance in a negative way. Like when you try to be like really still, I think inhabiting that in your body. So yeah, it is a lot, especially any kind of a cartoon or something like that's just, I feel like it works both ways, that they turn animated work into live work and vice versa. Like you see that happening all the time. It's no different. And that's again why I'm like, it's not just about, can you do a funny voice? It's like, can you act? And even for things I do dubbing sometimes, like for films, like for foreign films. And one of the things they were excited about when I went in and auditioned for the first one is that I had a theater background, because they were like, oh, you have acting training. That's great. And I had never done it before, but it was a really natural fit because you're matching a performance of someone who's already done it. You're like watching this Argentinian actress be upset and emote, and you're doing her voice. So you need to sound upset too. You can't just like say it like there's nothing to it. Like that's when people say it's like a bad dubbing job, is when it feels like there's no emotion to it. Someone's just reading words. So yes, all those things completely inform each other. And yes, you bring all that physical life of acting into the booth. I can't tell you how many times I've hit the mic by accident. I've hit the music stand. You wear quiet clothes for that reason. Like I would never wear like a nylon jacket or something really stiff because I move around so much, even for commercials. Like, even for that, like, I just have a tendency to like use my hands and use my body when I talk, even for that kind of thing, because you sound different than when you're trying to hold still.
No, you're absolutely right. Because if you're someone, like you mentioned, you talk with your hands a lot, part of voice acting is sounding natural. Like it's
Yeah.
not sounding like you're acting, even though you are.
And you talked about improv. I mean, I can't even tell you the amount of jobs, like auditions I get for even commercials that are like, send us your best comedian improvs because we want you to do it once as written. And then we want you to do another take where you improvise with it. And we want to hear what they come up with. That's a huge part of what I do. And lots of improvising, even doing things like video games, especially if the team is collaborative, which is really fun. When you're like, what if I did this? And they're like, yeah, that's great. Do that. And they're excited about it and they like it. Like you bring, and sometimes people are clear. Like they're like, no, 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 we want you to do this way. Totally fine. But you know, that people are open to a conversation where you have maybe an interesting idea and they want to hear it. That is a very satisfying way to work, I think. Like I'm okay 100% with showing up and being told what to do and doing that. If someone is very specific and clear, I can totally work with that, especially if they've really shared their vision with me and I get it. And I'm like, yes, this all makes sense to me. But then there's the people who are like really loose about it too, who are like, they want you to they're like, yeah, let's do a take as written, but then let's do another take and let's just see what you do. I just booked a short film and we did it once as written. And then they said, we want you to do it again and then just continue the scene. Like the scene ends here, but we want you to just continue it. And I said, okay, so we did. And then I got cast and she said, I'm actually rewriting that scene based on a lot of what you guys did in the audition. When like the director just wrote back and was like, they were actually, reconstructing that part because they liked a lot of things that came out with you and this lead actress. And I was like, that's so cool.
But it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with film is a collaboration.
Yeah.
And I'm with you that if there's a director who has a very clear mind and clear vision for what they want, it's great. But as I'll say this to you as, as someone who's directed before and talking to an actor, yeah, you as a director and a writer, you might write the lines of dialogue, but the actors are the ones who are actually performing them. They have to get into the minds of the characters, and they can add little nuances and little quirks that you may not, as a writer director, you may not have thought of, but it actually works better for the character. And I just think to completely shun that away would be wrong because, like I said, actors are the ones who are bringing the characters to life physically.
Yeah. I think collaboration, like if you've got a group of really smart people working together, coming from all these different disciplines, and you're open to ideas, there's just no telling, what kind of magic you can create.
Absolutely. So as we start to wrap up here, I know this is primarily a filmmaking podcast, but I am a video game fan, as my friends know. You are currently the voice of Rosalina, one of the now more prevalent characters in the Mario Brothers franchise. So how did you get that role, and how has your experience been bringing that character to life?
I'm the third person to voice it. So in terms of like, I always want to be clear with that. That's not like I created that. Like I picked it up, after two other people had already voiced it. Like that, it's not that fascinating of a story. I got it through my agent, I got the audition through my agent, auditioned for it. I sent in an initial audition and then they wanted to do a directed audition. So I did that. And I've told the story a lot, but that was the game that was right before Super Mario 3D World. That's the first game I did. She turns into a cat in that game. And nobody knew that at that point, right? Because the game wasn't even out, but I did the initial thing. And then they said, okay, now do it like a cat. And I was like, what? And they said, oh, she turns into a cat in this game. And I was like, oh. So then I was like, just kind of making all these cat noises because I just wasn't really sure. And I had not done video games at this point, really. Like, I think I had done maybe a couple little small projects, but nothing like, a game for Nintendo, nothing that big. So, I remember when it was over, they just kind of came back on the mic and I could hear that they were laughing and they were like, okay, thank you. And I was like, I don't know if they were like laughing in a good way or bad. Like people were like, that was ridiculous, or they liked it. I just couldn't tell. And I went to the engineer who was out there because I was in a different city than the people who were listening. And I said, how do you think that went? And he's like, I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. And I was like, okay. So I just went away and I was like, I have no idea if I'm going to get this or not. And then I did. And it's just been such a positive experience. They're such nice people to work for. It's so fun to do. It doesn't feel like work to me at all when I'm doing something like that. It does not feel like work. Like there's plenty of things I've done that feel like work, but that would not be one of them. So,
and that's when you know you found something great, when you can get paid to do something that doesn't feel like work.
Yeah. And anytime I've done like Fire Emblem Fates for Nintendo too, and just like working on Genshin Impact, and those sessions they just fly by. Like you're just like, oh, we're done already. All right. Like, and it's sometimes, it'll be like 4 hours and you just didn't feel it because it was a good time.
What's your all-time favorite Mario game?
I'm a big fan of Mario Kart. Like that's
classic.
All the Mario Kart ones. Those are really fun to do. I love racing against other people with that, and just kind of the camaraderie of it. But Super Mario 3D World definitely because it was, I mean, from the sense that was the first game that I ever did, like that holds a place in my heart because of that. Yeah, although I just recently saw the Super Mario Strikers stuff. Like people have been like posting a lot about that. That looks really cool.
Yeah, it looks insane.
Yeah,
it looks really cool though. I will say one quick thing about Mario Kart. The collaboration, the camaraderie can be great, but you can test friendships with Mario Kart as I've done in many, many years.
Yeah.
What is one piece of advice that you could give to an aspiring filmmaker? And we've been talking a lot about, trying, not worrying about failure, just doing it. What is one piece of advice that you could give?
I say this less because I'm not a filmmaker. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of films and a lot of small independent, startup films, like lots of really small projects, some of that have never seen the light of day. But what I think is really interesting and what I really respect is that anyone who has like a really strong point of view, where it's like, this doesn't look quite like anyone else's thing. And when you watch it, you know it. Like Wes Anderson is one of my favorite filmmakers. And it's because when you watch a Wes Anderson movie, you know what you're watching. And it was so funny because I was watching Fantastic Mr. Fox because I had gotten Disney Plus because I wanted to see Hamilton. And then I just like, let me catch up on all these movies I haven't seen. And Fantastic Mr. Fox was on there. And I had forgotten that he had done that film. And I'm watching it and I'm like, this feels like a Wes Anderson movie. And all of a sudden I looked at the credits. I'm like, it is one. Like, I mean, without knowing it, you know it. Like, and if you watch like even like Bottle Rocket, like his first movie, it's not where things are now, like with French Dispatch, but you see the seeds of that person's vision, or like you kind of know when you're watching a movie. Or like I love is it Alexander Payne who did like Election and Citizen Ruth? Like I love his movies, and just a very specific point of view. So I think rather than trying to figure out what people want, doing what you think is interesting and trusting that the right collaborators you will find them and find each other, and you will make something incredible. And it's not necessarily for everyone, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think this thing of like, I got to make something everyone loves just ends up a little too vanilla at some point. Like, it's not bad. It's fine. It's sweet. It's good, but it's not like exciting. And so I always think having a strong point of view and not being afraid to stick to that point of view, even if you're getting haters or even if you're getting pushback on it, or like people think it's weird, because there's a lot of things that people thought was weird that is now considered like revolutionary and classic. Like I'm a huge David Bowie fan, and like, trust me, I mean, people thought he was so weird when he came out and all the Ziggy Star stuff. It's like, what is this? This is weird. And that he was just even wearing makeup and like women's clothing, like that was just such a weird, not anymore, but at the time. But talk about someone who like did what they were interested in doing, had a really specific vision, stuck to it, and now is viewed as like iconic because of that. And it's that whole thing of like really like figuring out and then not being afraid to change. Because then you hear about like someone like him, especially that you always kind of know you're watching him, but his stuff was so different from album to album to project. It would be very different because he was trying out things that was interesting to him. And so artistically, to me, that's something I kind of aspire to, of like, not being afraid to do something that's a little weird and a little different. And yeah.
Yeah, I've been podcasting now for I think 9 years, and I've never heard anyone say that specific piece of advice on any of my shows before.
Really?
But I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah, it's tough to be different and almost in a way be proud of it, because I think deep down part of everyone wants to fit in, but it's also finding, what makes you tick and what makes you happy.
Right.
And even if it is different, doing it and not being afraid to do it. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, because you just never know when it's going to like hit the right person. And the more you read up on these people who had these, like some of their first projects and how things failed or nobody was interested or whatever, but they just were like, I don't care. I like it. And I'm going to keep doing it this way. Like even if it's not my cup of tea, I admire the hell out of stuff like that. And I want to be a part of stuff like that. To me, that's an exciting person to work with, even if I don't get it. And I've worked on plays for people. I've worked on a lot of new plays where I'm like, I don't know how people are going to respond to this, but I sure like being a part of this process because I'm just watching someone in their zone. And to get to be next to that, it's exciting.
It's infectious too.
Yeah. Yeah. And not everyone gets it, but that's okay.
Yeah. No,
like you can read all sorts of bad reviews on stuff, that again, later people appreciate. Sometimes things are ahead of their time. It's very true.
For sure. What's your favorite movie of all time?
Oh God.
I kid everybody with that question.
I was going to say that is like the hardest question because I like so many different things. I mean, like I will say like some of those Alexander Payne movies, like Citizen, like if I had to give like top 5, like there's got to be like Wes Anderson and Alexander Payne in the mix. Like movies I could watch over and over was, Election, Citizen Ruth, Royal Tenenbaums.
Royal Tenenbaums is great.
I love Darjeeling Limited too. A lot of people don't like that one as well, but I love that one. They're all so good in so many different ways. And then I'm trying to think of like other movies. It's always so hard off the top of my head, but there's try to think of it's in movies for moods, right? Like Encino Man fits a certain mood. And there's certain movies that I like there's movies that I have like there's a really random movie called The Last of Sheila. That's got like Richard Benjamin and James Mason and James Colburn and Raquel Welch and what's her name? Oh, I'm not remembering her name, but like you've got this like cast and it's kind of like a mystery. And my family and I had watched it on like that we taped it off TV and my family watched movies together a lot. And we watched this movie and it cut off the end and it's a mystery. And we didn't know who did what. It just like was cut off. We lost like the last 15 minutes and we had to wait a whole year for that movie to come back on. Cause this was like when you couldn't even rent it anywhere. It was such a random film. And I remember we would like watch the part we had and we would try to kind of figure it out. And then like a year later, we finally understood the ending of it. But it was written by Sondheim and Anthony Perkins. And I didn't know who either of those people were at the time when I saw it, but they both of them like created puzzles for the New York Times. And then they wrote this movie. It's dated to what it is, but I suggest like just watching it in terms of like, it's just a quirky movie and there's some great performances in it. That's a movie sentimentally for me because of that experience of like watching it so many times, trying to figure it out, waiting so long for it to come back. And then there it was. Like I own it now because that was but then we also have like Gene Wilder, like that Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother was a movie that my family loved. So we were like screwball Mel Brooks type stuff as well. So I have like sentimental favorites for that reason. And then movies that like kind of hit my aesthetic now.
And that's the great thing about movies is you have different favorite movies for different moods, like you were saying. Yeah. So it's tough to really pick just one.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with you. Do you have a website or social media you'd like to plug so the viewers and listeners can follow you?
Sure. My social media, I'm mostly on Instagram and it's just my name, Laura Faye Smith, and then Faye is Faye. So LauraFaye Smith. You can follow me there. I'm same handle on Twitter. Those are the main 2 social medias I have. And then I have a website, laurafaysmith.com. It's just a lot of clips of my work and stuff. But if you want updates about conventions or projects I'm working on or whatever, I have a film that's at a film festival right now. It'll be at Marina Del Rey this weekend, a movie called The Leap. And I think we just got into the Pasadena Film Festival with that too. And that was one that was done like a year ago. I completely forgot about it. And then I won like nominated for like a best supporting actress or something like that for that one. And I'm like, what movie? And it's like, oh, right, that movie. I did like a day's work on that. I completely forgotten.
Another one of those gems that just happened to pop up, later on down the line. Well, Laura, it was great getting to chat with you again. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show.
Thank you so much, Derek. It was lovely talking with you.
All right, let me play my outro music here. If you'd like to subscribe to the show, just head over to linktree.com/featureprezpod. You'll be able to find social media links where you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the fun podcast platforms. And of course, you can check out the show live on YouTube every Monday night at 8 p.m. Central Time. That's going to do it for this week's show. We'll see you guys back here next week for another fun episode of Feature Presentation.